Indre, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm very glad to have you on. I'm glad to be here. Where are we? Can you tell the people where we are currently?
Yeah, we're in my studio. Thanks for coming over.
You got a home studio.
I do. Yeah, I mean, I have 4 podcasts that I work on various times. And so I like to have a studio at home so I can work at all hours.
That's super cool. It's very nice. You have the books, very colorfully oriented books I've seen, Extended Mind by Annie Murphy Paul, and other ones that I know of. This is super cool.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I like to keep the books of the people that I've interviewed close by so that I can easily access them.
I do the same thing. I have them in the corner of my table. It's nice to look at them. Like, I'm connected with these individuals.
Yeah.
And certain sections of the bookstore, when you go there, you can see like, oh, these are my people.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you ever go to the bookstore though and you're
Yes.
like, oh, I need to interview that person.
I do that.
I know. It's like,
We're similar in that way.
totally.
And sometimes I see somebody I'm going to talk to like in May or April or later on or so on.
Yeah.
That's cool. Now, for people who don't know, where do you profess? Tell us a bit about your backstory and how you got to where you are currently today.
Sure. So I'm a professor of psychology at the University of San Francisco. And my backstory is a bit complicated. So, how much time do you have? But let me give you the short version, which is when I was a kid, I wanted to be an opera singer, but I also was good at science and math. And it was really hard for me to figure out which one I wanted to do for a career. So I kept putting off the decision to choose as long as I could. When I went to university, I went to the University of Toronto. I studied psychology, but I also kept up with all of my singing. And then after I graduated from my undergrad, I decided that I just wanted to go and be an artist for a year. So I moved to London and I worked as an usher at the Royal Opera House and had a really great year. And then I decided, well, wait a minute, I miss the science. I want to do more of the neuroscience. And so I went and got a Ph.D. in Cognitive Neuroscience at UCLA, where I studied memory. I'm really interested in how we form our identity and how we remember is a big piece of that. And then after I got my PhD, I was like, I just want to be a singer again. So I went and got a music degree here at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. And that's really when I started to see, hey, wait a minute, you know what? These two worlds aren't as far apart as people tell you they are. The artists and the scientists are really after the same thing. We want to understand what it means to be human. We just sometimes use different tools and different vocabularies. But if I could be a bridge between these two worlds, then I can really maybe make a unique contribution. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years, is serving as a bridge between the worlds of art and neuroscience.
You're a bridge, kind of like the Bay Bridge.
Yes. Yeah, or the Golden Gate, but hopefully not the bridge in Baltimore.
True that. That one, not so much. These successful ones that are currently working, that's valid. It's nice to be a bridge in that way. We have a lot of similarities with our active mind that I noticed, which is a cool thing. And you're a creator. I've always been a creator, which is a positive thing. It's like you're putting something out into the world. I think of it like you're stamping your presence into the world. You don't have to do that, right? You could have not been that, and then it leaves a big piece of you out forever.
Yeah, I think a lot of people sometimes ask me, like, why can't you just focus on one or the other? And the answer really is that if I get too heavy into the science, there's a part of me that feels like it's being cut off, that it's not being allowed to let out. Like, think of it something as like a wild animal that's caged. And the same thing is true if I spend all my time in the arts. I get frustrated with the unpredictability of it all and the kind of messiness, and I kind of want something tangible. So I'm happiest when I get to go from project to project. Not that I'm doing all things at all times, but that I'm immersing myself deeply into one project, knowing that there is an end to that project. And when that project ends, another one that's going to be very different is going to begin.
The variety there.
Yeah, it's really important to me. Maybe it's because I'm a Libra, or maybe it's just the way my mind works. But I think it's, I don't like to do things halfway. I like to immerse myself in them fully. But then I also like to completely shift gears and do something totally different.
You mentioned Libra. How about Myers-Briggs or Big Five? Any things on that front?
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I've really been inconsistent. And over each decade of my life, I feel like I've completely shifted in a lot of fundamental ways in terms of my personality. So I'm afraid I don't put a lot of, I don't really believe that the Myers-Briggs or these kinds of Big Five personality tests are really that useful for me. The only thing that I will say that I think has always been true is that I am open to new experiences. And as someone who studies the neuroscience of creativity, that is the one personality trait that seems to be common across all domains. There isn't a creative personality beyond someone who is open to new experiences. And not only do I think that that's sort of how I'm built, but also I keep thinking about like when I do get stuck and I'm not feeling like I'm being very creative or I'm, stuck in the same way of thinking, I try to expose myself to something completely new, and that tends to really help.
It's good to shift things once in a while. I was talking about that yesterday. Your mind gets refreshed, open. Oh, I'm going to try that. Wait a minute, what about that? And then even if it's the same thing you did 5 years ago that's different, it's a different time. So now this moment will show you something like, oh, that person a year ago was saying this. That's what that meant. I didn't pick up on that at that time. But now because I went to this area where we were together, oh, that. It's nice. Those little connections come up. But if you didn't go to that new area or try the thing or challenge yourself, it doesn't kick into play.
Yeah, that's true. And for a long time when I was younger, I felt like I needed to contribute to everything I did, that I need to, I was like, it was the kind of person who was just waiting for her chance to speak rather than really listening. And I think that that's something that's really changed for me in the last, few years, is that I've started to really appreciate the importance of listening and the fact that, in some ways listening is a superpower, because the more you talk, the more you're giving to the world and the less you're growing as a person. But the more you listen, the more you're taking from the world, and then, maybe becoming better.
This one's a big deal. Recently, I was doing a talk with two people, and one of them at the end of the talk said, you're almost too good of a listener. And there's something great to listening and at the same time having a lot to bring. So you can be high on both of those, and then you have a real strong conversation because you're bringing all that you have, and then you're giving full opportunity and a pause for the other person to go.
Yeah, that's right.
There's a fullness to it.
Yeah.
I see it as like two areas you can both be full in. It's not just like one takes away from the other.
Yeah.
Now, music and science, both. The combination of it. And you have sung opera. I have freestyle raps. They are completely different. How long have you...
I don't know that they're completely different, but yeah, I will say there are a lot of differences between freestyle rap and opera, although there's a lot of improvisation in opera. So it's just different, just using, tones as opposed to words.
On that point, tell me a little bit about the improvisation in opera.
Yeah, so actually there's a long history of improvising for opera singers. So if you look at the operas that were written, a couple hundred years ago, oftentimes the melody was just a kind of sketch for the artist. And then often they were written for a specific artist, and the composer knew, I'm going to bring this artist in and they're going to put their own stamp on this piece. And they would do what's called like a cadenza, for example, where, you have a high note, or a climax at the end of a piece, but you don't just like sing the high note. You kind of approach it in a new way, or you like go around it, or you do all this kind of like freestyling within that tonality of like the tones that you're using. And that's exciting for the audience because they know where your destination is, but they don't know how you're going to get there. And it's new every time. And the artist can put their own signature on it. So, and then the kind of sad thing happened that over the last 100 years, as operas have been recorded or performances have been recorded, singers have started to mimic what the great singers of the past have done and have started to improvise less. And I think there's still in Baroque opera, there's a big kind of culture of improvisation, but in a lot of the other types of opera, that has kind of gone away, and instead there seems to be a lot of mimicking going on, which I think is a trend that needs to shift, and hopefully now it's shifting back as young artists are realizing that they can be creative.
I've thought about this mimicking in many different categories and what AI will do to mimicking as far as taking every piece of things that have been done, and then it's almost somebody described it as a flattening of what humans have done. So everything they've done has all this 3D aspect to it, and then AI flattens it into a thing that seems great, but the creativity or expansion, it doesn't expand upon what we currently have, and mimicking also doesn't fully expand on what we currently have. Are we already, as humans, do we have more to go, or have we done all the great things and then now it's a flattening of sorts?
I mean, I think we have so much more to go, and I actually think AI, especially generative AI, is a great tool to enhance our creativity. Here's what's really interesting about generative AI. So if you ask a lot of the really eminent creatives, they'll all agree that creativity generally is, remixing of ideas that have been said before. I mean, it is rare to find a truly novel idea, but it's it's not rare to adapt an idea into a new domain. So I think that's why some of the best creatives in a domain actually came from the outside. They came and they brought something else in. But Gen AI can serve that tool for you. So imagine that you are composing a new piece of music and, you know, you're a freestyle rapper. You love Dr. Dre. He's a great producer. So do I, as I aspire to be like Dr. Dre. But now imagine you could program an AI with the entire catalog of Dr. Dre's works and the entire catalog of Beethoven's works and the entire catalog of Miles Davis's works. And now you can play. Right? Now you have a tool that has so much more knowledge than you as an individual does, but you still need to curate. You still need to make something good. Because if you just leave it to the Gen AI, it's going to come up with something probably not that good. But the ability to then work with this massive catalog and try out all these new things, I think is really the power of Gen AI.
That's a good way to look at it. It's not limiting in that aspect.
I don't think so. I mean, I think it can be limiting. And I think this is something that actually we're studying in my lab right now, which is at what point in the creative process should you invoke Gen AI? Is it in the idea generation phase? Is it in the idea verification phase? Is it somewhere in between? And when is it that it becomes a problem where you just fixate on something as opposed to continuing to innovate? And when is it a tool that actually can increase your innovation? So, I mean, my right now, my current running hypothesis is that it's really good for you to start the process yourself, then put in some prompts, see what it does, then leave it alone for a while, then go and work on your own for a bit, and then go back and, you know, add or improve those prompts, etc. So it becomes this kind of iterative process, just like any kind of design thinking does. But it's one where you're not settling down and committing to an idea too early and then getting stuck.
I would agree. I always think about expansion and consolidation, and we are the expansion part of that, I would say. And so if you go too early to the AI, you're consolidating. It's like editing a sentence before you even wrote the sentence. It's like a weird, like editing it halfway through writing. That wouldn't make sense. But you would write it out, your best thoughts. Then if you get stuck on like where to get some more thoughts or some concept that you don't know, then okay, what have other people done in the category? It's like an engine that you attach to the clutch and connect back to what people are doing, and then it's back to you expanding there. So I would agree with that.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
If you started with the AI and then you join it afterwards, you'd be coming from I guess flattened or limited framework, and then you would you were limited for no reason at that point.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Tell us about your lab. What is your lab called, and what have you usually covered there?
Yeah, so it's a relatively new lab. It's a few years old. I call it the Creative Brain Lab because that allows me to do almost anything I want. And we have a number of different projects going. I recently completed a fellowship with the California Academy of Sciences, working with their big picture conservation photography competition. And it was interesting. We used eye tracking and surveys, eye tracking and surveys and a bunch of other tools to look at what it is that people are seeing when they look at great conservation images that are, winning this competition. What are they seeing when they look at AI versions of those? Can we find a difference? Where are they looking? And it's that kind of exploratory work to try to help understand, the experience that someone has when they're in front of a piece of art. And then we also have a project with a playground opera intervention. So this is an intervention that goes into public schools. Right now, they're in New York City primarily. That's where our studies are based. And it teaches kids in these public schools, 3rd, 4th, 5th graders, to write their own opera and create a video at the end of it. And we think that this is interesting for one reason, that it's something these kids have probably never done before. I mean, most of these kids don't even know what opera is, let alone
what
have written
that?
one. And it's often in a foreign language. And so we think that this gives kids a real sense of, a really new experience, but also ultimately helps them bond to each other in the group. And so social cohesiveness in the classroom. It also helps them understand their own emotions, because opera is emotion writ large. It's literally like, you have an emotion, let's sing about it for, a few minutes. And so it's about really understanding and learning to regulate those emotions. And then I think it really builds kids' self-esteem, because they go from doing something they've never heard of to creating a product in that field. So we're testing this as a model to help kids build self-esteem and learn to regulate their emotions. Then we have a big body of work looking at the anxiety that's specific to being creative in the moment. So what we found is that people who identify as women are more likely to feel anxious when they're asked to be creative on the fly. And so we think that that might be one of the reasons why women self-censor themselves in meeting settings or in settings when they're asked to be creative, and that might explain why women are underrepresented in leadership positions and in other various creative domains. So we're studying that. We're studying what that kind of anxiety, what impact that has on a person's creative performance, and how we might mitigate it. As I mentioned, we're looking at the influence of Gen AI during the creative process. And then we are also a part of a large multi-site study to look at college admissions and how we might use measures of creativity to help universities find candidates who maybe traditionally, because of GPA or SAT or other results, would not have risen to the top of the pile, but because they're creative, actually it's a really good predictor of future GPA and future success. And we think that a lot of companies, a lot of employers are going to look for creativity as a skill. So that's another sort of large scale project of how we can help universities figure out who are their creative people. And in part, we want to do that because we want to encourage high schools and then all the way down the line to include activities that train the creative muscles. And if, hey, it's going to help you get into college, isn't that a great reason to have an arts program in a high school?
Yeah. I always think of creativity linked with self-esteem because my thoughts, how can I combine them in some way? Put something out there. Oh, I put something out there. It was me. Mm-hmm. I'm part of this. I'm actually part of the story. When you're part of the story, then you feel great. When you're not part of the story, you're like, you can only do so much as a viewer before you're like, am I even part of this?
Yeah, I mean, look, we have a mental health crisis amongst adolescents, especially those who were using social media on their phones all through elementary and high school, as Jonathan Haidt has beautifully written.
The anxious generation.
Yeah, the anxious generation. And part of that is because it's hard to feel like you matter when you're inundated with all of this stuff. But being creative and being part of even a group of people who are doing something creative shows you that you matter. And I think that's one of the greatest powers of a lot of these, music programs in schools, arts programs in schools, theater programs in schools, to some extent too, athletics programs in schools. If you feel like you make a difference and whether or not you show up is important, I think that can really go a long way to mitigate some of these mental health issues that these individuals are facing.
It's a substantial issue that is recurring and is being mentioned quite a bit because of the impact it's having on the youth, which will then become adults later on.
Yeah.
On the idea of improv and the people who plan things out, which are two separate categories in my mind, how does each group do well today to expand upon their framework of on the fly versus or planning things out? And then can these individuals have qualities of the other? Can they plan things out?
Yeah, well, I think this idea that you can just improvise or you can just be a planner and be successful doesn't really hold water. I think the really great improvisers are the ones that have actually done some planning and they've set up some rules or boundaries, etc., for how they're going to improvise. If you as you learn to become an improviser, whether it's in stand-up comedy or whether it's in music, you first have to gain the technical skills that then you can draw upon easily when you're in the moment. And if you don't have those skills, then your palette is really limited and your work probably isn't going to be as good. But the more you can build up that skill set and that toolbox, the more you have to choose from when you improvise and the more effective your performance is going to be. So I see improvisation and planning as both being really important in the process towards innovation, but just at different stages. There's a time to plan, there's a time to prepare. I mean, there's a great, Wallace's 4-stage traditional model of creativity, is that, you start with preparation, which is where you build the skill set, you build the knowledge that you need, then you incubate. You go and do something else. You let your default mode network take over your mind so that you can imagine and see associations that maybe other people or you haven't seen before. that leads to an illumination, an aha moment, or maybe multiple. And then you go back and prepare again and do that, iterate. And then finally you get to the verification and editing stage, which is also really important. And I think that's a stage that a lot of improvisers might not put enough emphasis on. So, you're recording a podcast, you're doing all this work, but if you just put it up raw, it wouldn't be as good as if you just do a little bit of verification, a little bit of editing towards the end to make sure that the product that you have really is compelling. And so, yeah.
That's a great point. That's always been a category that's not really been my category, the editing element that you're mentioning, which is very accurate what you're saying. And you're right. A little bit in that category does make a big difference, because then you can notice things that might have been an issue, something to make it a little more interesting. It might give you an idea for maybe a clip to make or something you want to add on. If you don't do that, it's not the improv base, but it's doable. And it's worth it. It's like you should use your bass to energize you, and then do the other parts that are not exactly your default from that energy you got from the improvisation or creativity.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you have to think about the audience's perspective. It's not like the audience is in the room with us. We wish they were, and that would be different.
Why are you not in the room?
Right? But if you're watching something that is, a little bit more two-dimensional and you're watching, then, the way that your attention system works, it's like you have to make it a little bit more compelling as a creator. You can't just let it go in that sense. And so, yeah, it's a different medium.
Speaking of medium, I usually do video, audio, and I used to do text. Your podcast is in audio form, in high quality. It sounds great, and some super duper guests. Tell me about your podcast experience and how it has progressed from when you started to now, and if you're surprised by anything at this point.
Yeah, so I've actually been podcasting for 10 years. So I guess that kind of makes me a veteran of sorts in the podcasting world. And I have 4 different podcasts that I've produced over the course of those years. The one that is kind of, I think probably the one that you're thinking of is Inquiring Minds, my bread and butter, weekly show on science and society. We have more than 400 episodes. And this is a kind of, your traditional interview format. And it has evolved over time. But one of the things that I think has stayed consistent is that, I want to have interesting conversations with people that I'm curious to talk to and who have some big ideas. And I want to make sure that the audio quality is high. That's always been really important to me as a musician, as a singer. I find it really grating when the audio quality in a podcast is not good. And that's partly because of the way that I consume podcasts, which is usually while I'm doing something else. I'm out for a run, or I'm doing the dishes, or I'm driving. And so I want to make sure that experience is pleasant to listen to and understandable, and I don't have to sit there and focus my entire attention to it. If the audio quality is garbled, it really takes a lot more focus to understand what people are saying. So that has been important. It's gotten easier over the years. Like I used to send mics to people. I would send somebody to come and do a tape sync, but I don't have to do that anymore. Now we have these tools where most people actually, thanks to the pandemic, have a decent mic. And if they don't, I can do some post-editing work that can make them sound a little bit better, even from their built-in mic. So that technology has improved a lot. Now, I've also done these other podcasts that are more produced. I did a podcast called Radiant Minds, The World of Oliver Sacks, which is an Audible original, which was 9 episodes. It took a year. It was a ton of work. It was a huge team. And it was really, really rewarding and fun. I think that's some of my best work because, we really crafted each episode. We found the best guests. We told the best stories. We really went deep into the storytelling, but it was a ton of work. It's not something that's sustainable on a weekly basis. And I think that there's room for that. And I love that podcast. It's evergreen. I send people to it all the time. And then there's a podcast that I have that's kind of in between, which is called Cadence, What Music Tells Us About the Mind, which is, a little bit in between. It's got a little bit more of a conversational format to it, but it's also heavily produced and it has a good music track to it and et cetera, et cetera. And then there's the podcast I do for Visa called Money Travels, which is a little bit more like Cadence, where it's a little bit more produced. But there we're also doing video, and that's kind of my first foray into video. I have actually captured a lot of video on Inquiring Minds, but video is like really big files, and the thing that bothers me about video when it comes to these more produced podcasts is that you really have to, it's a totally different editing process. And so you either, I think, if you're going to do a kind of one-off, you either have to do it for the video and or you have to choose to do it for the audio, because being able to do both, unless you have a really big budget and a lot of time, is pretty labor intensive. People have said to me, but you got to get on YouTube. That's where everybody's watching their podcasts. And I'm like, but that's not a podcast. Like, the thing that I love about podcasts is that it is audio forward and that it is audio structured. So I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of a dinosaur in the sense that I probably need to do more video and sort of capture that. But then there's a part of me that just feels like, but wait, are we losing something if people are now seeing what they're also hearing? Because to me, the beauty of the audio medium is that it really does feel more intimate. And I just love the depth of the sound and it's like listening to vinyl. There's just something really special about it. And I don't want to lose that. I see enough reels. I see enough videos.
This is very true. I get where you're coming from. You have a very fine-tuned sense of the audio. It is more of like a thing, like certain text platforms before, they're a thing. You can't replace them. You can't add other things to them. They were supposed to be text, and that was it. So a podcast is audio. There is something about like, that's the show, you're hearing it, and there's no visual. It's just you're in that world. Some of the top podcasts are from that, and they have the great little like maybe piano at the beginning or something, and they give you a story, and you're enveloped in it, and that was what podcasting was. The video thing is a little bit of a combination, and you see the people, but a lot of people are checking while they're doing other things, so they don't even see most of the video that way. So there is that. It's almost like two elements there. I think you would do very well on video. And I will say mine, I had audio and then later went to video. And I would have probably wanted the earlier ones to be on video too, looking back. It's just nice to have. But yes, that's true. The effort, the files, it does change the focus a little bit, because now it's just not just about the great auditory experience. You're thinking of the visual presentation, which is not exactly the same way of communicating.
Yeah, I definitely find when I do video too, and now I am capturing video for Inquiring Minds, and eventually I'll find the budget to hire an editor to put all those out there. But I do find it's a little bit different. I'm focusing on looking at the camera, not necessarily looking at my guest, so that it looks like I'm looking at my guest, but I'm actually not looking at my guest. And I do find that like puts just a slight layer of something in between us. And often I find my guests, even though I tell them beforehand, look, we're going to do audio and video, they're surprised when I turn on the video, and then they shift a little bit in terms of how open they feel they can be. So I worry about, or at least I have to figure out how to be, how to prepare them better, how to make them feel more comfortable, because I do feel like then there's this pressure of, it's like being on a Zoom call and not doing hide self view. Right? Where it's a little bit exhausting. There's like a little part of your brain that is like monitoring what you look like. And I think that sometimes takes away from what I find, which is the joy of conversation, which is like, you don't know where it's going to go. And you want people to take off a bit of their filter so that you really get deep inside the things that you're talking about.
This is a big deal. I've thought about it quite a bit, self-monitoring. I have always not really had that as part of me, because I'll just say stuff, do stuff, make stuff, try stuff, fail a billion times. It's fine. It doesn't hit me as it does everybody I know. So I like to do that part and then influence others in that way. But if you're thinking of the audience and you're thinking of the other people taking part, you have to take that into account, because you don't want to bring it from this level of connection and expression to down here because you added in the video element, which maybe a lot of people don't even watch when they check the episode.
Right.
There's a lot to take into account. How has music changed how you think? If you didn't have a life with music, opera, learning that, how are you a different person? Or if that is too much of a stretch, how has it impacted you that you can tell?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would be a different person. And sometimes when I spend too much time not being immersed in music, I feel myself becoming a slightly different person. And the answer is that with music, I feel like for me, music reminds me of the joy of being alive, and just the depth, the breadth of what it means, to be human and to have these emotions. For me, I find emotions that I can ride emotions through music that in my day-to-day life, as I'm trying to get work done, I can easily repress. And so the music helps me access that side of me. It helps me access that joy and the nostalgia and the love and the sadness and the tragedy and all of that. And then I feel like, okay, like I can let some of that go as opposed to holding it, in my body in some kind of tension over time. So, to me, the most obvious consequences, I get very irritable if there's been a long time before I've let that come out. And so I think I would be like, kind of a bitchy, cold person if I didn't have that side of it. I think I would be a lot more ruthless maybe maybe more calculating. But I find that music kind of helps me kind of keep compassion as a big part of my life.
That's a nice form. Like it warms you in a way.
It does, yeah.
That's cool to see what it would be like without that. That's true. If I didn't have certain elements, then I couldn't have that outlet, and then I'd be maybe more robotic in some way. Or that's true. You wouldn't be able to connect in that form. What are a couple of issues you think are ailing society at this time that are tackleable? What comes to mind if you look at society right now?
I actually think climate change is tackleable. I think we just need to get on it. I think we need to get off of our laurels and out of the doom spiral and just start doing things. And I think that even though it feels futile, all these little things that we can do, I think it's a start. And if you start doing the little things, then I think that you might feel more motivation to do the bigger things. So I actually think that that's the fundamental existential crisis that we're facing, and that everybody needs to start participating in some way. The other thing that really worries me is this mental health issue and the fact that we live in these filter bubbles and that we don't communicate with one another anymore. I think we need to put down our phones. I think we need to stay off of social media more than maybe we do. And I think that we need to reconnect with each other. And I think we need to do things live. We need to go to concerts. We need to go to art galleries. We need to go to, the park and throw a ball around and just be together and be outside. I think that actually would solve a lot of the issues that we're currently facing in terms of it allows us to interact with one another. It allows us to meet people that we normally wouldn't meet outside of, our little spheres. And by doing that, I think we'll see more of the humanity between who we are. And I think a lot of the fissures that we have in society now are amplified by the way that we engage online. It's really easy to be mean online when you don't have the person in front of you. And so I think that those are two things that I would say are fundamental problems that are ailing our society. And I think that if we start doing more things to engage with each other in real life, we will solve a lot of those issues.
That's very informative. I have a lot of different ideas in my head, but at this time, I would like to thank you for taken part in our discussion. And where can people find your work and material?
Well, Armin, it's great to be on your show. Thanks for having me. All of my work is on my website, indreviskontas.com, Viskontas. And so there's links to my podcast, the video work that I've done, my academic work, etc. So that's kind of a one-stop shop. But if they want to listen to Inquiring Minds, it's on wherever they get their podcasts or inquiring.show.
Wonderful. Thank you for having joined this discussion and bringing a bit of knowledge about music, the mind, their connection, and the work that you have done.
Thanks, Armin.
Glad to have you on, and we are out.